I counted those 2 silver dollars 3 times outside Dr. Morrison's office. Like arithmetic might change what they could buy. My son's fever broken. Or flour for the month. Not both. Never both. The spring mud soaked through my skirt where I sat on the wooden steps, cold and heavy against my legs. Through the office window, I could see Thomas lying on the examination table, his small chest rising and falling too fast, skin flushed red with fever. 4 days now. The same recurring fever that had plagued him all winter, coming back like a ghost that wouldn't stay buried. Dr. Morrison's nurse, Mrs. Henley, with her starched white apron and pinched mouth, peered through the window at me. She knew. They all knew. A widow's seamstress wages don't stretch to cover doctor's fees. $3 a month I made, hunched over my needle by lamplight until my eyes burned. The one-room adobe Thomas and I called home cost $1.50. That left $1.50 for everything else. Food, lamp oil, firewood, thread for my work. 2 silver dollars for the doctor. $2 that meant no beans, no flour, no bacon for 30 days. I pressed my thumb against the coins until the edges bit into my skin. My husband Jacob's voice came to me then, the way it sometimes did in quiet moments. Don't let them make you small, Ruth. But Jacob was 2 years dead, crushed in the Silver King mine collapse, and his voice couldn't pay for medicine. His voice couldn't stop our son from burning up with fever. The door opened. Dr. Morrison stood there, wiping his hands on a towel that smelled of carbolic acid. Mrs. Whitman, I've given him laudanum for the pain, but I'll need payment before I can provide more treatment or medication to take home. I know, I said. My voice came out flat, dead. I'm working on it. Working on it won't cure fever. He wasn't cruel, exactly, just practical, just a man who needed to be paid for his labor. Same as anyone. But practicality felt like cruelty when it was your child lying there with skin hot enough to burn. I stood up, mud sucking at my boots. Can I have until tomorrow? Mrs. Whitman. Please. He sighed, glanced back at Thomas. Tomorrow morning, no later. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Tomorrow I'd still have $2. Tomorrow I'd still have to choose. What kind of mother was I? What kind of mother couldn't afford to save her own child? I sat back down on the steps after he went inside, and I cried. Not loud sobbing, I'd learned to cry quietly, so people wouldn't stare, but tears that came hot and bitter, dripping off my chin into the mud. That's when the shadow fell across me. I looked up, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. An elderly woman stood there, watching me with dark, steady eyes. Apache, I realized with a start. She wore a worn calico dress, the kind missionary societies handed out, but her long gray hair hung loose down her back in the traditional way. Her face was weathered as old leather, creased with lines that could have been from laughter or sorrow or both. I knew who she was. Everyone did. The town called her that savage hermit woman who lived somewhere in the hills. Children dared each other to get close to her clearing. Women crossed themselves when she came to town for supplies, whispering about heathen practices and dark magic. She looked at me for a long moment, then gestured with one weathered hand. Come. I stared at her. She gestured again, more insistently. Come. I don't. I started, but she was already turning, walking away with a surprisingly spry step for someone so old. I looked back at the doctor's office, at my 2 useless silver dollars, at the mud and the gray sky and the cold spring wind that promised nothing good. Then I stood up and followed her. I didn't know her name then. Didn't know anything except that I was following a stranger into the hills while my son lay fevered in Dr. Morrison's office. And this was either the stupidest thing I'd ever done or the only thing left to do. She moved fast for her age, taking a path that led away from town toward the rocky foothills. I had to walk quickly to keep up, my boots slipping on loose stones. After 10 minutes, I went back, gathered Thomas in my arms. He mumbled against my shoulder, burning hot, and followed her trail. The weight of him, God, the weight of my 5-year-old son, getting heavier with every step up that rocky path. My arms ached, my back ached, but I kept climbing because what choice did I have? The woman paused at a switchback, waiting for me. She made a soft sound, not quite words, more like encouragement, and continued up. I followed. What else was there? My mind spun with the town's stories, the hermit woman who stole children, the witch who cursed crops, the savage who refused to live proper, Christian, civilized. But I'd also heard, whispered among the poorest families, that she knew herbs, that she'd helped old Mrs. Chen's mother when she was dying, eased her pain when there was no money for laudanum. Which truth was I supposed to believe? The town said poor people deserved their poverty for not working hard enough, for not being thrifty enough, for not praying hard enough. The town had been real generous with judgments, and real stingy with help when Jacob died. So maybe the town didn't know everything. The path climbed higher, leaving the mud behind for thin, high desert air that smelled of sage and juniper. Wind whispered through pinyon pines. Thomas's breathing was labored against my neck, his small fingers clutching weakly at my shawl. Please, I whispered to the woman's back, to God, to anyone listening. Please let this be the right choice. We came over a rise, and there it was, a small clearing protected by a half circle of boulders. A brush shelter built against the rock face, tidy and solid. Drying racks with plants I didn't recognize hanging in neat rows. A fire pit with smooth stones arranged around it. Everything orderly, cared for, lived in. The woman gestured to a pallet of wool blankets spread near the fire pit. Her meaning was clear: lay him down. I hesitated. This was it, the moment of commitment. Once I laid Thomas down, I was trusting this woman, this stranger, this savage the town feared, with my son's life. She looked at me with those steady dark eyes and waited, not pushing, just offering. I laid Thomas down gently on the blankets. His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. His skin was dry and papery with fever. The woman knelt beside him, placed one weathered hand on his forehead. She closed her eyes for a moment, then nodded once. A nod that said, I know this sickness. I can help. She stood and walked to her drying racks, began selecting plants with practiced hands. Long gray-green leaves, strips of bark, small purple flowers. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times, 1,000 times. And I realized she was going to help him. She was actually going to help my son. The woman worked in silence, her gnarled fingers moving with surprising deftness. She took strips of gray bark, willow, I'd learn later, and placed them in a small clay pot with water from a leather bag. She built up the fire with quick efficiency, set the pot to heat. While the water heated, she gestured for me to sit. Then she did something I didn't expect. She took my hand, placed it over my heart, then pointed to herself and said something in Apache. A name, I thought. She repeated it slowly. Nalin. Nalin, I tried. The syllables felt strange in my mouth. She nodded, pleased. Then she pointed to me, questioning. Ruth, I said. I'm Ruth. Root, she repeated, the TH sound foreign to her tongue. But close enough. She smiled, just a small quirk of her lips, and patted my hand. The water began to steam. Nalin lifted the pot with a cloth, let it cool slightly, then poured dark liquid into a wooden cup. She held it to her own nose first, inhaling deeply, then held it out for me to smell. Bitter, earthy, like the smell of the riverbank after rain. She mimed drinking, then pointed to Thomas, then made a sleeping gesture with her hands against her cheek. Finally, she held her hands apart, fever high, then brought them closer together. Fever going down. I understood. Give him this. He'll sleep. The fever will drop. But understanding and trusting were different things. I looked at the dark tea, at my unconscious son, at this woman I'd known for less than an hour. If I gave Thomas this and it hurt him, if I made the wrong choice again. Nalin seemed to sense my fear. She dipped her finger in the tea, touched it to her own tongue, swallowed. See, not poison. What choice did I have? Dr. Morrison wanted $2 I didn't have. This woman wanted nothing but my trust. I knelt beside Thomas, lifted his head gently, pressed the cup to his lips. Drink. Sweetheart, I whispered. Please drink. He swallowed reflexively, coughed, swallowed more. The bitter tea dribbled down his chin, but most of it went down. Then there was nothing to do but wait. Nalin added wood to the fire and settled onto a woven mat, her eyes half closed but watchful. I sat beside Thomas, one hand on his chest, feeling each breath. The afternoon faded to evening, evening to night. Stars came out, sharp and cold overhead. The fire crackled. Thomas breathed. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. Every change in his breathing, every shift of his body, I was there, watching. Nalin stayed across the fire, a silent presence, occasionally adding wood. Somewhere in the deepest part of night, Thomas's breathing changed, deepened. His skin began to cool under my hand, the terrible dry heat fading to normal warmth. By dawn, when pale light crept across the clearing, his fever had broken completely. He was sleeping, truly sleeping. Not the fevered unconsciousness, with cool skin and even breath. I wept then, pressed my face against his small chest and wept with relief so fierce it hurt. When I looked up, Nalin was watching me. She nodded once. See, I told you. But she wasn't done. Before I could gather Thomas to leave, she gestured, Wait, learn. She took my hand and pulled me to my feet, led me out of the clearing into the hills. The morning air was cold and clean, smelling of sage. She brought me to a stand of trees by a small stream, gestured to the gray-barked trunks. Willow. This was where the medicine came from. She showed me how to peel the bark, using a small knife, taking only thin strips from each tree so it wouldn't die. She showed me how to identify the tree by its long, drooping leaves, its preference for water. She drew pictures in the dirt with a stick. Tree, water, bark, fever down. Then she took me to other plants, a low, feathery one with white flower clusters, yarrow, for wounds, a patch of mint by the stream, for digestion, for nausea. Each one she made me touch, smell, taste carefully. Each one she drew in the dirt, gesturing its use with her hands. My hands learned the texture of leaves, the smell of crushed stems. My mind tried to hold all of it, willow for fever, yarrow for wounds, mint for bellies. When we returned to the clearing, Thomas was awake, sitting up groggily. He saw me and smiled. Mama? I'm here, sweetheart. Nalin disappeared into her shelter, emerged with a small woven basket. She placed inside it samples of each plant she'd shown me, willow bark, yarrow, dried mint. She pressed it into my hands. I tried to give her my $2 silver. It was all I had. But she'd saved my son. She'd earned it far more than Dr. Morrison. She pushed my hand away, shook her head firmly. She pointed to the basket, then to me, then made a gesture of opening, spreading, sharing. The basket wasn't payment, it was an invitation. I looked down at the plants nestled in woven yucca fiber. My throat tightened. Thank you, I whispered. She touched my shoulder, brief and warm, then stepped back. I gathered Thomas in my arms, lighter now, healthy, and started down the path toward town. When I looked back, Nalin stood at the edge of the clearing, one hand raised in farewell. I'd come up that path desperate and powerless. I went down it, carrying medicine. I returned the following week, the basket carefully hidden under my shawl. Thomas had stayed well, the willow bark tea keeping his fevers at bay. But I needed to learn more, needed to understand this gift Nalin had given me. She was waiting, as if she'd known I'd come. No surprise on her weathered face, just a small nod of satisfaction. She gestured me to sit by the fire pit, where she was grinding something in a stone mortar. Over the weeks that followed, a pattern emerged. I'd come every few days when I could spare the time for my sewing work. Nalin would teach me a new plant, a new preparation. We built our own language from gestures and drawings and patience. She taught me to make salves by heating bear fat with crushed yarrow until it turned green and fragrant. She showed me how to dry mint leaves so they'd keep through winter, hanging them in loose bundles in a dark, dry place. She demonstrated tinctures, plants steeped in whiskey, if you could get it, or vinegar if you couldn't, and how long to let them sit before straining. My hands learned alongside my mind the exact pressure to crush seeds without pulverizing them, the smell that meant herbs were ready to harvest versus too young or too old, the way to test salve temperature on the inside of my wrist before applying it to wounds. And slowly, carefully, we learned each other. One afternoon, while we were harvesting wild onions from a hillside patch, I tried to ask about her family. I pointed to her, made a rocking motion like holding a baby, then a questioning gesture. Her face changed, closed, then opened again with deliberate courage. She held up 2 fingers, 2 children. Then she made a gesture of digging, of going down into the earth, the mines. She'd lost them to the mines, and a husband too, she indicated, with a gesture to where a man would stand beside her. I understood loss. I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out Jacob's work gloves, worn smooth by his hands, the leather still holding the shape of his fingers. I'd carried them every day since he died. She touched them gently, nodded. We sat in silence for a while, 2 widows on a hillside, united by absence. But there was humor too, moments that surprised me with their lightness. Once, I tried to pronounce the Apache name for sage. She taught me several plant names in her language, and got it so spectacularly wrong that she actually laughed. A real laugh startled out of her. I laughed too, and we sat there giggling like girls while the sage swayed in the wind around us. When did I stop being afraid of her? I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. Fear faded gradually into comfort, into friendship. Her silence stopped feeling threatening and started feeling peaceful. When we worked together, her grinding herbs while I mended Thomas's shirt, both of us in companionable quiet, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Thomas came with me sometimes, and Nalin was gentle with him, showing him which berries were safe to eat, which plants to avoid touching. He called her the plant lady with the easy acceptance of children who haven't learned prejudice yet. In town, though, I kept our arrangement quiet. A friend showed me, I'd say vaguely when someone asked where I'd learned about willow bark. Secrets felt safer than truth. But secrets don't keep forever. Mrs. Chen found me at the well one morning, her face worried. Her daughter May had cut her hand on a broken jar, and the wound wouldn't heal right. Red and swollen, weeping pus. I hesitated. Helping Mrs. Chen's daughter meant revealing what I knew, what I could do. It meant stepping out of the shadows. But May was 8 years old with an infected wound. What was I supposed to do? Pretend I didn't know how to help her? I might know something, I said carefully. Let me see her. The yarrow salve worked. Within 3 days, the redness faded, the wound closed clean. Mrs. Chen tried to pay me with coins she couldn't afford to spare. I refused. She bowed to me instead, deep and formal. Thank you. You saved her hand, maybe her life. Word spread after that, but only among certain people, the poor, the desperate, the ones who couldn't afford Dr. Morrison's fees, a miner with an infected cut on his arm, the blacksmith's wife with stomach troubles that kept her from eating, a child with burns from getting too close to a stove. I helped them all. Sometimes I succeeded, sometimes I didn't. I wasn't a miracle worker, just a woman with some knowledge of plants, but I tried. And each time I returned to Nalin's clearing, I reported what had worked, what hadn't. We were partners now, collaborating across language barriers and cultural divides. I was becoming something, a healer, someone with knowledge and purpose, someone who mattered. And that's when the trouble really started. The general store was crowded when I walked in. my basket visible on my arm for the first time. I'd stopped hiding it. What was the point? Half the poor families in town knew what I did. I needed thread, red thread, to mend Mrs. Patterson's Sunday dress. A sewing job she'd commissioned before she knew about my other work. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mrs. Patterson stood at the counter, her back rigid with self-righteousness. The sheriff's wife, mother of 3, pillar of the Methodist Church. She saw me and her mouth pursed like she'd bitten into something sour. "Mrs. Whitman?" she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet store. "I heard you've been practicing medicine without a license." I met her eyes. "I've been helping people who can't afford a doctor. There's a reason doctors need training. You could kill someone with your folk remedies." She said folk remedies the way someone might say garbage. "I could," I agreed. Same way Dr. Morrison could kill someone with his treatments. Same way he nearly killed old Mr. Hanson last month with too much laudanum. At least my mistakes don't cost $2. The storekeeper coughed. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Patterson's face flushed. "I also heard you've been consorting with savages, learning from that Indian woman in the hills." Consorting, like Nalin was something shameful, something dirty, like friendship across cultures was a sin. "Her name is Nalin," I said quietly, "and she saved my son's life when I had no money and no hope." "Decent women don't learn from Indians, Mrs. Whitman." The words came out before I could stop them. "Decent women don't let children die for lack of $2 either." The silence that followed was absolute. Mrs. Patterson's face went white, then red. "How dare you!" "I need thread," I interrupted, my hand shaking but my voice steady. "Red thread, 3 spools." The storekeeper, bless him, moved quickly to get it. I paid, took my package, and walked out with my basket still on my arm and my head still high. But my hands shook all the way home. That night, Thomas asked me the question I'd been dreading. "Mama, why do the other kids call you names?" I sat on the edge of his bed, smoothing his hair back. "What names, sweetheart?" "They say you're a witch, that you learned from squaws." He stumbled over the ugly word, not quite understanding its weight. I took a breath. "Do you remember being sick last spring? The fever that wouldn't break?" He nodded. "Dr. Morrison wanted $2 to help you. We didn't have $2, so a woman named Nalin, the plant lady, she helped you instead. She taught me which plants could bring down fever, which ones could heal wounds. She saved your life, Thomas, and she did it for free." "Is she really a squaw?" "She's Apache. That's her people, like we're from the East. She's a widow, like me. And she lost her children like I lost your father. She knows things about medicine that Dr. Morrison never learned in his fancy school. And yes, I'm learning from her, because knowledge doesn't care about skin color." Thomas thought about this. "Then why do people say it's bad?" "Because people are afraid of things they don't understand, and sometimes fear makes them mean." I kissed his forehead. "But you don't have to be afraid, and you don't have to be mean. You just have to do what's right, even when it's hard." He hugged me tight. "I think Nalin's nice." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." But the next week, I learned just how much my public stand had cost me. Mrs. Patterson canceled her dress order. So did 3 other women. My seamstress income dropped by half. The Methodist minister's wife stopped me on the street to warn me about risking my immortal soul by learning from heathens. Dr. Morrison complained to the sheriff that I was stealing his patients. The sheriff, Mrs. Patterson's husband, started watching me with narrow eyes whenever I walked through town. And then came the town council meeting. I heard about it from Mrs. Chen, who heard it from her husband, who'd been delivering laundry to the mayor's house when the discussion happened. The council was concerned about the Indian problem, specifically Nalin's influence on town women. There was talk of forcing her to relocate to the reservation, of making it illegal for her to trade in town, of running her out entirely. I climbed up to Nalin's clearing the next morning to warn her, My legs burned from the climb. My breath came short in the thin air, but I pushed myself faster. She was harvesting chamomile when I arrived, her hands gentle on the small white and yellow flowers. I tried to explain with gestures. Angry townspeople, her needing to leave, danger. My hands fumbled. Inadequate. But she understood. I saw it in her eyes. This wasn't the first time she'd faced this. Wouldn't be the last. I waited for her to pack, to prepare to flee. Instead, she handed me the basket of chamomile and showed me how to dry it properly. Hang it upside down in a dark place. Shake it when fully dry to separate the flowers. Her silence said, "This is who I am. This is what I do. They cannot change that." And I understood. She wouldn't run. She'd faced worse than the town council and survived. She would continue living as she chose, teaching what she knew, being who she was. The question was, would I? My seamstress work dwindled to almost nothing. Only the poorest families still hired me, and they could barely afford to pay. I started selling off Jacob's tools, his good hammer, his saw, the level he'd treasured. Each sale felt like losing him again, but Thomas needed to eat. The judgment came from everywhere. Women crossed the street to avoid me. The baker's wife refused to serve me until all other customers had been helped. At church, when I still went, people left empty seats on either side of me, like poverty and defiance might be catching. "You should stop," Mrs. Henley told me after service one Sunday. "For your son's sake, you're making him an outcast too." She meant well, probably, but I thought of Mei Chen's infected hand, of the miner I'd treated for a crushed finger, of the Mexican family's baby I'd saved last week with mint steam when croup threatened to choke her. "I can't," I said simply. Dr. Morrison started refusing to see me when I came to buy supplies at his office. "I don't sell to competitors," he said coldly. "I'm not competing. I'm helping people who can't afford you." "Then they should find a way to afford me, or do without." He shut the door in my face. But the cruelest blow came from Thomas's school teacher, Miss Appleby. She pulled me aside after school one day, her pretty face troubled. "Mrs. Whitman, I'm concerned about Thomas's education. The other children are being influenced by their parents' attitudes. They're excluding him from games, calling him names. It's affecting his ability to learn." "So teach them not to exclude him," I said. "Teach them that cruelty is wrong." "I'm trying, but Mrs. Whitman, if you would just stop this medicine work, if you distance yourself from that Indian woman, the children would forget." "Would you ask me to stop breathing too? To stop being his mother?" I was shaking with anger. "I'm helping people, Miss Appleby. I'm easing suffering. That's not something to be ashamed of." "But at what cost?" she asked softly. "Your reputation, your livelihood, your son's future." I didn't have an answer, or rather, I had too many answers, all contradictory. That night, I lay awake while Thomas slept, staring at the ceiling of our small adobe room. The walls felt like they were closing in. What was I doing? Was Miss Appleby right? Was I sacrificing my son's future for my pride? But it wasn't pride. It was purpose. For the first time since Jacob died, I felt like I mattered. Like I was more than just a poor widow who couldn't afford a doctor. I had knowledge, skill, the power to heal. How could I give that up? Yet the cost kept rising. The next week, I learned the town council had made their decision. Nalin would be encouraged to relocate to the reservation. If she refused, the sheriff would enforce it. The vote was scheduled for the following Monday. I asked everyone I could think of to speak against it. Mrs. Chen said she would, but her husband forbade it. They couldn't risk their laundry business. The miner I'd helped was sympathetic but scared for his job. The blacksmith's wife just shook her head. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitman. I truly am." No one would stand with me. On Sunday night, I sat at my small table with my basket in front of me. I could stop, burn the basket, apologize to Dr. Morrison, beg Mrs. Patterson for forgiveness, distance myself from Nalin, let the council do what they wanted. Thomas would be safer. I'd get sewing work again. Life would return to normal. Except it wouldn't. I would know, every day for the rest of my life, that I'd been a coward. That when friendship and integrity cost too much, I'd chosen comfort instead. I picked up a sprig of dried yarrow, rolled it between my fingers. The sharp, herbal scent filled my nose. I thought of Nalin's hands, patient and sure, teaching me to recognize this plant. I thought of Mei Chen's healed hand, of Thomas's broken fever, of the Mexican baby breathing easy after the steam treatment. Medicine works because it works. Truth doesn't need approval. I couldn't unknow what Nalin taught me. Couldn't unsee the healing I'd witnessed. Couldn't pretend that knowledge should be hoarded by those who could afford to pay for it. At dawn, I dressed in my best dress, my only good dress, really. The black one from Jacob's funeral, carefully mended. I pinned my hair up proper. I took my basket. Thomas was still sleeping when I left. I kissed his forehead and whispered, "I love you. Everything I do for you. Even when it doesn't look like it." Then I walked toward the town square where the council meeting would be held. My hands were shaking. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might break out of my chest. But I kept walking anyway. The night before the council meeting, I didn't sleep at all. I lay in bed listening to Thomas breathe, watching shadows move across the ceiling as clouds passed over the moon. The sensible thing would be to stay home, to let the council do what they wanted, to protect myself and my son. Every argument played through my mind like a loop. You can't fight the whole town. You'll lose everything. Thomas needs a mother who's accepted, not ostracized. What good will you be to anyone if you're destitute? But underneath those practical concerns ran another voice, quieter but insistent. What kind of mother would I be if I taught Thomas that truth only matters when it's convenient, that friendship ends when it costs too much, that we should abandon people who helped us the moment it becomes difficult? I thought about Jacob. He'd worked in the Silver King mine for 5 years, knowing it was dangerous, knowing the owners cut corners on safety because profit mattered more than miners' lives. He'd tried to organize the workers, tried to demand better conditions. The other miners had been sympathetic but scared for their jobs. When the cave-in came, it killed Jacob and 2 others. The owner paid for a nice funeral but changed nothing about the mine. "Don't let them make you small, Ruth," Jacob had said once, after a particularly discouraging union meeting. "That's how they win. They make you afraid to take up space." I'd spent 2 years being small, being quiet, taking whatever scraps people offered and being grateful. Maybe that was survival, maybe that was necessary. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Around midnight, Thomas woke with a small fever, nothing serious, just a seasonal cold. I reached automatically for my basket, brewed willow bark tea without thinking. As I watched the water heat over our small stove, breathing in that familiar bitter earthy smell, I realized this was part of me now. These skills, this knowledge. I couldn't separate myself from it any more than I could cut off my own hand. Thomas drank the tea and went back to sleep, his fever already dropping. I sat beside his bed, stroking his hair. "I'm sorry if this makes your life harder," I whispered to his sleeping form. "But I need you to grow up knowing that some things matter more than being accepted. That knowledge is power, and sharing knowledge is love. That the woman who taught me to save your life deserves loyalty, not betrayal." He slept on, peaceful and trusting. 5 years old, too young to understand the storm coming, but not too young to learn from it. I thought about all the people Nalin and I had helped. Not wealthy people, not important people, just poor folks who hurt and needed healing and couldn't afford Dr. Morrison's fees. Their lives mattered too, even if the town council didn't think so. Morning came slowly, the sky lightening from black to gray to pale blue. I washed my face in cold water from the basin, braided my hair with careful precision, put on my funeral dress and pinned it properly, took my basket from its hook by the door. My hands were shaking. They'd been shaking all night. But I'd made my choice. Some things were worth shaking for. The town square was crowded when I arrived. 30 or 40 people, mostly men, standing in loose groups around the makeshift council table. The 5 council members sat in a row: the mayor, the bank president, the owner of the general store, the mine foreman, and Dr. Morrison. I was the only woman in the square. That hit me as I walked toward the center. Just me in my black dress and my medicine basket, surrounded by men in their Sunday suits, making decisions about who got to stay and who had to go. Dr. Morrison was speaking when I arrived.
Unlicensed practice of medicine is not only illegal, but dangerous. Mrs. Whitman has been administering folk remedies without proper training or oversight. People could be harmed.
Mrs. Whitman has helped people, I said loudly, stepping into the center of the square. The crowd went silent. Dr. Morrison's mouth hung open mid-sentence. My name is Ruth Whitman, I continued, my voice shaking but carrying. I'm a widow and a seamstress. And yes, I've been learning medicine from Nalin, the Apache woman who lives in the hills. I'm here to tell you why. The mayor cleared his throat. Mrs. Whitman, this meeting is about ordering the Indian woman to relocate to the reservation. Your activities are a separate matter. No, they're not, I interrupted. Had I just interrupted the mayor? My mother would have died of shock, but I kept going. You want to remove Nalin because she's teaching women like me, because she's giving us knowledge you think we shouldn't have. So let me tell you what that knowledge has done. I set my basket down at my feet and looked around the square. Some faces hostile, some curious, some carefully neutral. Last spring, my son had a fever that wouldn't break. Dr. Morrison wanted $2 to treat him. $2 I didn't have, because my seamstress work pays $3 a month and my rent costs half of that. I sat outside the doctor's office with $2 silver in my hand, my entire food budget for the month, trying to decide if I should let my son suffer or let us starve. I saw a few people shift uncomfortably. Good. Nalin saw me crying. She didn't know me, she didn't speak English, but she saw a mother in trouble and she helped. She took me to her clearing, gave my son willow bark tea, and his fever broke. Then she taught me how to make it myself. How to identify the trees, harvest the bark properly, prepare it right. She taught me for free, asking nothing in return. Dr. Morrison started to speak, but I talked over him. Since then, she's taught me yarrow for wounds, mint for digestion, chamomile for calm, and a dozen other plants. I've used that knowledge to help people in this town. Mei Chen's infected hand, Roberto Mendoza's crushed finger from the mine, Sarah Becker's baby with croup. Poor people, mostly. People who can't afford $2 doctor visits. I opened my basket, pulled out a sprig of yarrow. This is yarrow. In Apache, it's called. I pronounced the word Nalin had taught me, probably mangling it, but trying. It stops bleeding and prevents infection. I used it on old Tom's cut arm last month. The cut healed clean. You can ask him. I pulled out willow bark. This is willow. It brings down fever and eases pain. It saved my son's life. It's saved other children's lives since then. I pulled out each plant, naming it in English and attempting the Apache names Nalin had taught me, explaining what it did. The crowd watched, silent. You call Nalin savage, I said, my voice breaking slightly. But she showed me more Christian charity than anyone in this town when my son was dying and I was desperate. She healed him when I had no money and no hope. She asked nothing in return except that I learn, that I understand, that I help others the way she helped me. I looked directly at Dr. Morrison. You want to talk about dangerous medicine? You gave old Mr. Hansen too much laudanum last month and he nearly died. You charged Sarah Becker $5 to look at her baby's croup and tell her to keep him warm. I treated that baby with mint steam and he lived, and it cost her nothing. That's not. Dr. Morrison sputtered, his face red. I'm not saying you're a bad doctor, I said more gently. But I am saying medicine shouldn't only be for people who can pay. Knowledge shouldn't be hoarded. Healing shouldn't have a price tag that poor people can't afford. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward from the crowd, her face cold. You're defending that Indian woman because she taught you some plant tricks. But decent women don't consort with savages, Mrs. Whitman. There are standards. Decent women don't let children die for lack of $2 either. I repeated my earlier words. But that's exactly what would have happened to my son if not for Nalin. So forgive me if I don't care much about your standards. A ripple went through the crowd. Someone gasped. Mrs. Patterson looked like I'd slapped her. Then Mrs. Chen stepped forward. Small, quiet Mrs. Chen who did everyone's laundry and never made trouble. My daughter May, she said in her careful English. Mrs. Whitman healed her hand. Doctor say $5, wanna cut it open. Mrs. Whitman used plant medicine, hand healed perfect, free. There was a pause, then Maria Mendoza, the Mexican woman whose baby I'd helped, stepped forward too. My baby, he could not breathe. La Señora, she helped. The plant water, the steam, he lives now. One by one, people I'd treated stepped forward. Not many, maybe 6 or 7, but they spoke, they told their stories. Old Tom showed his healed arm. Yarrow salve, he said gruffly. Worked better than anything the doc gave me. When they finished, the square was quiet again. The council members looked at each other, uncertain. Dr. Morrison spoke first, his voice stiff. Perhaps there is value in traditional remedies, used properly, under supervision. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. The mayor cleared his throat. The question remains what to do about the Indian woman. Her name is Nalin, I said firmly. About Nalin, the mayor corrected himself. The council is concerned. The council is concerned about maintaining control, I said bluntly. About making sure knowledge stays with the people who charge for it. But knowledge doesn't belong to anyone. Medicine grows wild, free for anyone willing to learn. You can try to control that, but you'll fail. Because suffering doesn't wait for council approval, and healing doesn't require a license. I picked up my basket. Nalin will keep living where she lives. She'll keep teaching anyone who asks, and I'll keep helping anyone who needs it, whether you approve or not. You can run me out of town if you want. You can take away my sewing work, make my life harder, but you can't make me unknow what I've learned. You can't make healing wrong just because it doesn't come from the right kind of person. I turned to leave, then stopped. Nalin stood at the edge of the square, watching. She must have come down from the hills when she heard about the meeting. Our eyes met across the crowd. She stepped forward, moving with quiet dignity, and stood beside me. The message was clear. Whatever they decide, we face it together. The mayor looked at the crowd, at the council, at us. Perhaps, he said slowly, we should table this discussion. Clearly there are considerations we hadn't fully explored. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a defeat either. It was a postponement, a pause, a moment of uncertainty where there had been certainty before. Nalin and I walked out of the square together, my basket on my arm, her hand briefly touching my shoulder in approval. We'd spoken. We'd been heard. The rest would come as it came. Time is strange. It pools and rushes, sometimes slow as honey, sometimes fast as a creek in spring flood. Looking back now, I can barely remember the exact moment things changed. There was no single dramatic shift, just a slow thawing like ice breaking up in March. Dr. Morrison came to Nalin's clearing 2 weeks after the town square meeting. I was there, learning to make a poultice for boils. We both stared when he appeared at the edge of the clearing, his black medical bag in hand, looking uncomfortable and determined in equal measure. I'd like to learn, he said stiffly, if you're willing to teach. There are gaps in my education. Nalin looked at me. I translated with gestures, though I suspected she understood more English than she let on. She considered for a long moment, then nodded and gestured for him to sit. Over the following months, the 3 of us developed a system. Dr. Morrison handled surgery, serious injuries, conditions that needed his medical school training. Nalin and I handled preventive care, common ailments, chronic pain management. We referred patients to each other. We learned from each other. It wasn't always easy. Dr. Morrison struggled with his pride. The town struggled with the idea of an Apache woman teaching a white doctor. But slowly, grudgingly, things shifted. Nalin moved her clearing closer to town, built a more permanent shelter with help from old Tom and some of the miners I'd treated. People stopped calling her that Indian woman and started using her name. Not everyone, not the Mrs. Pattersons of the world, but enough. I trained other women, Mrs. Chen, Maria Mendoza, a few others, creating a network of healers who could help their communities. We shared knowledge freely, the way Nalin had taught me to share it. My sewing work never fully recovered, but I made enough from my healing work. People paid what they could, sometimes in food, sometimes in labor, sometimes in coins, to keep Thomas fed and housed. We were poor, but we'd always been poor. At least now we were poor with purpose. Thomas grew up watching all this, watching his mother stand up to the town council, watching Nalin teach patients with the same patience she'd shown teaching me, watching Dr. Morrison slowly, stubbornly learn to respect knowledge that didn't come from medical schools. He learned that courage sometimes looks like shaking hands and a wobbling voice, that friendship can cross any divide if you let it, that medicine is medicine regardless of who teaches it. Now he has children of his own. His daughter woke this morning with a fever, and he came to me, worried. "Which plant, Ma?" he asked, though he knows. I've taught him. "Willow bark," I told him. "You know this." "I know, but tell me the story again." So I did. I told him about the spring day I sat in the mud outside Dr. Morrison's office with $2 silver and an impossible choice. About Nalin seeing me crying and gesturing, "Come." About climbing into the hills with Thomas burning in my arms. About willow bark tea and a long night's vigil, and dawn breaking on a child with cool skin and even breath. "She saved your life," I told him, as I've told him 100 times before. And she taught me that medicine grows wild, free for anyone willing to learn its language. He knows the story. He's heard it since he was 5 years old. But I tell him again anyway, because forgetting is easier than remembering, and we must remember. My basket sits on the table between us, worn and stained with years of use. The yucca fiber Nalin wove so carefully is fraying at the edges, but it still holds, still carries. Thomas's daughter will get willow bark tea for her fever, and it will work, because it works. Because truth doesn't need approval. Because medicine grows wild in the hills, by the streams, in the places between civilization and wilderness, waiting for anyone brave enough to learn. Nalin passed last winter, peacefully in her sleep, at an age none of us could guess. She'd spent her final years not alone and isolated, but surrounded by students, by friends, by a community that had slowly learned to value her. Dr. Morrison spoke at her burial, talking about how much she'd taught him. Half the town came. I miss her every day. But her teaching lives on in my hands, in the hands of the women I've trained, in the medicine we make and share. My granddaughter reaches for the basket, curious. "What's this one, Grandma Ruth?" I pick up a sprig of yarrow, hold it to her nose so she can smell the sharp, herbal scent. This stops bleeding and fights infection. In Apache, it's called... I pronounce the word Nalin taught me all those years ago. "Can you say it?" She tries. Gets it wrong, tries again. Just like I did, just like we all do when learning something new. "Good," I tell her. "That's good. Now, let me teach you about willow bark." Outside, the spring wind carries the smell of sage from the hills. Somewhere up there, willow trees grow by the streams. Yarrow blooms in sunny patches. Mint spreads along water's edge. Medicine grows wild. It always has. It always will. We only need the courage to reach for it. 2/2.